My name is Allison Fox, and I am the CEO of American Prairie Reserve. I joined American Prairie Reserve 10 years ago after I graduated from business school, and I had spent a summer in Glacier National Park and had great appreciation for the big open spaces of the West and of Montana and of public lands. And so when the opportunity to join American Prairie Reserve arose, I jumped at it. American Prairie Reserve exists to do one thing, and that is to build a vast grassland park here in northeastern Montana. When we established our national park system in 1872 with Yellowstone, we went on to protect a number of our iconic landscapes, but we never protected a large swath of the grasslands. And temperate grasslands worldwide are the least protected terrestrial biome. So here in the 21st century, we have the opportunity to create a 3.5 million acre wildlife reserve with all of the flora and fauna and natural systems and processes that were once here back, and a place that the public can enjoy as well.
A lot of people think of Yellowstone as, the flagship national park. Yellowstone, for most of the species inside it, isn't actually the native habitat. Yellowstone's a more mountainous, rocky type landscape, and actually the only reason those species are popular in that area is because it's one of the last protected areas. It's sort of their last refuge. They were driven back from all the other areas. Grizzly bears, wolves, elk, and bison, those are all plains animals.
The American Prairie Reserve, once complete, will be home to almost all the species that call Yellowstone home too. And it's a grassland park, which means that it will have a much higher carrying capacity as compared to Yellowstone's terrain.
My name is Danny Kinka, and I am the Wildlife Restoration Manager at American Prairie Reserve. My job is to take the land that we're acquiring as American Prairie Reserve and fill it up with animals at its simplest level. How we go about doing that is different for different species and different contexts, but the primary goal is to create the reserve, this large wildlife reserve, and then of course the next goal is to fill it with wildlife, everything from bison to wolves to black-footed ferrets and prairie dogs. The project is 1.5 times the size of Yellowstone National Park. We need that much space to have enough space for bison to roam, and not just a small herd of 150 animals that's a token, that's a conservation herd, but a large enough herd that can migrate through and graze the grasslands in ways that actually have ecological impacts, that can maintain variable grass heights, heterogeneous grass heights throughout the prairie, so that we can create habitat for multiple different bird species that require on long grasses and short grasses and no grasses at all. Prairie dog towns that can stretch from one horizon to the other, that can support things like black-footed ferrets, one of the most imperiled mammals on the continent. Grasslands as an ecosystem are incredibly imperiled across the planet. For whatever reason, they were overlooked 150 years ago when we were setting up the park system in this country, and when other countries were doing conservation efforts for land preservation as well. This place has been used and traversed and loved by people for thousands and thousands of years, and to a large extent probably co-evolved with the presence of people, native peoples, for thousands and thousands of years. We keep that in mind as we do wildlife restoration, that this is a place that, even though it looks very, very empty, is a place that people have been for quite some time.
We work primarily with the Sioux tribes on Fort Belknap, the Ani and the Dakota tribes. And we've really been getting to know one another as neighbors over about the last decade, and so we support one another's events. Every time we have a bison release here on American Prairie Reserve, when we're bringing in new bison, we have members of the tribes come down and do a blessing ceremony and welcome these bison back to their ancestral homelands.
My proper name is my great-grandma said it was. Wa'ak Yanath, horse capture. My modern day name is George Paul Horsecapture Jr. I am the son of Spotted Otter, who is the son of White Rabbit, who is the son of Big Fox, who is the son of Horsecapture. I'm Aaninin, nowadays known as Gros-Ventre, but I'm a White Clay man. That's who I am. The history of present day Fort Belknap, like all Indians, not a good deal. Fort Belknap, we were forced here.
When we came to this continent and started settling the continent, there was probably about 30 million bison, and we thought it was an endless supply. We felt that we could harvest the animal and they'd never run out of bison. Following the Civil War, people started really settling up the plains, and they were rounding up the Indians or putting them onto reservations. They knew the bison was their food source, and they, in order to subjugate the Indians, they killed more bison. And it finally ended up, we wanted the land for grazing and for farming, and people didn't seem to really care.
Fort Belknap is a part of a much larger tract of land, which is called the 1855 Treaty. That was with us and the Blackfeet in the United States government, but reduced, all the time. And the United States government, particularly in those days, and some of the mentality I know is still there, manifest destiny. The end justifies the means. Fort Belknap is just a very small part of us nomads, us Gros-Ventres, home range. And our home range is coast to coast and pole to pole. It's really hard for the outside to wrap their mind around what the buffalo mean to us. We had such a close relationship back when they was trying to civilize us, turn us into Christians, turn us into taxpayers, trying to get us just to change everything who we are. And if you think about it, very few races, other than the Indians, went from their language, their ceremonies, all this stuff, to where we are today in such a short period of time. Phil Sheridan, Civil War guy, he went before the president at the time, the president of the United States at the time, and the only way we're going to deal with this Indian problem, get them to sit down on reservations, or in those days it was territories. You hear the word Indian territory and stuff like that. Is we have to get rid of the buffalo.
With the disappearance of the buffalo, a religious movement known as the Ghost Dance spread throughout the tribes of the Western Great Plains. It was believed that this prayer could bring back the buffalo.
That idea of the Ghost Dance, they were trying to dance back the buffalo. They was trying to dance back their ways.
The Ghost Dance movement was seen as an act of rebellion by Washington. In the winter of 1890, it came to a head at Wounded Knee. There, the U.S. Army opened fire and killed hundreds of unarmed Lakotas performing the dance.
Massacred. Massacred men, women, and children unarmed during a ceremony. That would be like going into a church or a synagogue or something and killing a person just for being who they are.
With all hope of bringing the bison back to the Great Plains gone, it was much easier to force tribes like the Ani and the Nakota onto reservations like Fort Belknap, which is located just north of the American Prairie Reserve.
In one sense, they had to come to the brink of extinction because they wanted to, for a better term, make us civilized. And it just really set things off kilter for our world. There's scars that those things leave.
This grassland here in northeastern Montana was identified as one of the best regions to try and preserve one of the last vestiges of that true virgin prairie ecosystem and restore it to look something like the American Serengeti that it was as few as 150 years ago, when you would have large herds of bison roaming out here, as well as elk and deer and their corresponding predators following them through open grassland, just as Lewis and Clark saw it when they came through here, and as the Native Americans knew it for thousands and thousands of years before white Europeans showed up on this continent. Bison and our prairie dogs assume that role of ecosystem architect. The bison, because of the way they graze, provide heterogeneous landscape in terms of grass height. That's those multiple different types of grass being utilized by multiple different species. Some birds will like tall grass, some like short grass, some like no grass, you name it. The bison manage that habitat, so to speak, for them, and the prairie dogs kind of do the same thing. There's a kind of a romantic notion when folks think of certain parts of Africa, the grasslands of Africa. You imagine a big, open, extensive landscape, giraffes and zebras and lions and all these species that are out there moving as big herds, big, giant mammals out there on the landscape. And that's tragic, because not that long ago, very, very recently in the grand scheme of things, just a couple hundred years ago, these grasslands would have been filled with North America's own version of those large mammals, these Pleistocene remnants and these large charismatic mammals that would graze in the same abundances, and not the same species, but functionally similar ways as the species that we think of as so iconic on those African grasslands. Bison are important to creating the habitat, restoring it to the way it looked for all of the species that call this place home, whether they're here now or just finding their way out here.
Well, there's certainly some controversy around this project, because what we're aiming to create is a wildlife reserve, and this land has been used for the last 100 years for cattle ranching primarily. We're buying the land when it comes for sale on the open market, just like anyone else would, and so I think that ability to do what we want on our own lands and have our own vision for our own lands is respected by a lot of our neighbors. We also recognize that we are going to be surrounded by cattle ranching even when our final wildlife reserve vision is complete.
We actually saw a lot of opposition to the prairie reserve around it, just from neighboring ranches. There was one billboard that said, "Don't buffalo me," and it was a protest of the reserves buying up land. And a lot of that hostility is because the ranchers think that the prairie reserve, by buying up ranch land, is eliminating the rancher lifestyle from the West. And I think they're especially hostile because a lot of the prairie reserve's money comes from wealthy donors.
They remove all of these miles and miles of fences that surround the ranches and keep the cattle in, and if they want to have a contiguous landscape for wildlife, they have to remove all the fences. So the land that the prairie reserve buys is going to be rewilded, never to be used for ranching again.
The American prairie, they're unique in a way. Come and visit. We're not going to kick you off. We're not going to, we're going to welcome you. We'll make you a sandwich. We'll invite you to some of the, these doings that, are going on and stuff. We'll help you with your tourism. Some of you farmers and ranchers, think about it. If that's going to be the biggest game reserve in North America, do you realize some of these farmers and ranchers, the entrepreneur opportunities that will arise out of that?
Anytime you try to do something new on the landscape, I think it's only reasonable that certain people would have their hesitations about it. We think that we can do this in a way and still be good neighbors, invigorate the economy of this area, bring lots and lots of tourism revenue, maintain some of the traditional uses of this landscape, not lock it up. The whole idea of this place is to keep it open to people. And we do what we can to be good neighbors.
I've had incredible experiences in every season out here. I think one of my favorite winter experiences I was out here on a beautiful, beautiful February day. Prairie was covered with snow, it was bright blue skies, and we saw a herd of probably 600 to 800 pronghorn all moving in a group migrating south, stretched out over a mile. And those are something that you hear only the old timers see, and so I feel really incredibly fortunate to see that. And as the pronghorn population rebounds here, we can get those kinds of sightings back.
Our bison got cameras, critter cams, that they wore around their necks, which allowed us to kind of see the world through the eyes of a bison. And those collars fell off after 2 weeks. They were programmed to fall off, and it fell to me to go find them. It was really, really snowy out here this winter, so kind of tough to get around, and it seemed too far to ski, and so I got a snowmobile, and I took off over the hill trying to chase this beeping collar signal to try and go find it. And so I came over on the snow machine, and they heard me. The snow machines are loud. And so they heard me before I came, and when I got up on the ridge, I got to see 15 to 20 bison running full tilt through 3 to 4 feet of snow right across the horizon. This giant, magnificent, powerful animal just plowing through all of this snow like it was powder, like it was baking soda. Just cruising right against this pale blue winter sky. And I killed the engine right away, and I just sat there and I watched it. And you couldn't see any fences, you couldn't see any people. You could see miles and miles to the horizon, and all I could see was snow and snow and snow and blue sky, and these bison running across the landscape. And I was like, that's why I'm here. That's I think why we're all here.
American Prairie invited some of our kids and myself down. They were releasing young buffalo to BLM, Bureau of Land Management land. And they opened the gate. The Indians were not allowed to even think about releasing buffalo there. But when they opened that gate to that BLM land, that was them ghost dancers' prayers coming true. Sometimes prayers take a long time, long time. Our kids got to witness that.